I'm just going to run quickly through your track record. So you started out at SFA, so you did 5 years there. You then went to Hambros. You did just over 6 years there. You then did 20 years at Goldman Sachs. Now, I guess the thing to tell the audience is that you did general compliance advisory. You then started to specialize in financial crime and became MLRO at various institutions. And you finished your institutional career at Credit Suisse, where you were MLRO and did investment banking compliance, sort of.
I was interim head of compliance twice.
Okay.
Never taken interim job, and head of financial crime compliance.
Okay, perfect. So that gives you a sort of an idea of Mark's background, and we're going to jump around with some things that we think are interesting, where Mark can give his perspective and insight, having worked as a regulator, having worked with a financial crime focus, but also being in big institutions. And some of the stuff we're going to talk about is related to culture. And some of those insights. So let's
all on a no names basis, of course.
Oh, really? Yeah, we don't want Mark to get sued. So let's start right at the beginning. Can you tell us a little bit about how you ended up at the SFA, where you worked in the transaction monitoring unit? And is it possible to sort of translate what that would be like in modern times, or is it just...
Well, I kind of, a guy called Lindsay Thomas, who we were just talking about, set up the transaction monitoring unit. And at the time, it was a massive idea, which most people thought was mad, and might actually have been mad, to monitor all the transactions that were done in the London market. And he had a whole load of technology people trying to get all the data. And making firms get all the data, which they're still being fined for not doing. And he needed a kind of business specialist to sit on that team. And he asked me to do that. I mean, I'd only been working for 3 years, so I was hardly a business specialist, but kind of thought it was. And it was great fun because it was a complete blank slate. And we set it up, and it's still going today. I mean, I kind of wish I hadn't set it up, having had to face off to it for most of my career afterwards. But the concept of it was a good idea, and it's brought quite a lot of reporting discipline to the industry, I think. How I joined what was initially the stock exchange, and then morphed into TSA and SFA. What was I actually, you missed the bad bit on my CV where I started at Pricewaterhouse and didn't enjoy it very much. So I left Pricewaterhouse and I was walking down Fleet Street. I think I might have been going to the LSE careers office because I'd gone to LSE. And I happened to walk into a recruitment consultant, which I think was in the bottom of the Reuters building. I think it was called ABC Recruitment. What I didn't realise, because I was not totally with it, was that it was a recruitment consultant mostly for people in the medical profession. So I walked in and kind of spoke to the receptionist, who then said, we've just recruited the head of personnel from Chase Manhattan Bank. So I'll get an appointment for you. And I had the appointment, and she said, you're the first person I've seen, and I'm setting up this financial services recruitment practice. So I'm absolutely going to guarantee you I get you a job. And I got an interview at the surveillance division of the stock exchange, and I must have done okay. There was a weird test involved, which I can't really remember. And so I got the job. So there was a lot of luck in ending up where I ended up.
Excellent.
But it was good.
Yeah, absolutely. So just moving on to kind of modern regulation. Obviously, and this is I know you because I ended up working for SFA as well. And that's how I got to know you those many years ago. But obviously, regulation has changed so much. But if you look back and you sort of look at how regulators behave now and how they supervise, do you think there are some old tricks that we used in our day that they should maybe have retained, that you'd like to see a little bit more of in the way they regulate and supervise now?
I mean, there's a volume issue for them, but the kind of desktop supervision versus talking to people, and this is true if you're in a compliance department as well. You really need to talk to people and find out what they're actually thinking and look them in the eye and all that kind of stuff. So there's some kind of balance there, which I think FCA may possibly have got a little wrong. And then there was, I don't know whether you remember this, that there was a real spirit at the stock exchange. It was like people were trying to do the right thing. There were some bad actor firms in the stock exchange at the time, and the surveillance division was set up to not get the bad actors, but kind of to get the bad actors. And they knew who they were, and they really focused on that. And they probably weren't quite as evidential as they would have to be now. But I think that directness was interesting. And when people are saying, go for growth, get rid of some of the rules, what rules are blocking growth, I think there's a bit in there that isn't necessarily about that. I think it's about simplicity and directness in the way regulators deal with firms. I mean, I don't know whether you remember this, but in the stock market crash, 87, Bob Wilkinson, who was head of the surveillance division, he's no longer with us now, amazing guy. He used to have all the garters and braces and all the gear, but he stood with he had his foot on the desk, 1 foot on the desk and 1 foot on the ground, so you could see all these garters and all that. And he rang Barclays in Lombard Street, and he said, "You will not default any broker." And they didn't. Now, I don't know how that forceful message actually works, but again, that was kind of real directness. And there's so much evidential stuff now that I guess we can't think that FCA would act like that. But there must be some simple approaches that they could use and learn from that time.
Indeed. Okay, so I'm going to move on a little bit. I really wanted to avoid talking about politics today, but I can't resist talking about the man on everyone's lips at the moment, who is of course Nigel Farage. So one of your pet peeves in the regarding compliance burden is the treatment of PEPs, so politically exposed persons. You feel that it's a waste of time, and actually we should worry more about fighting real financial crime. Can you expand on that a little bit?
So, yeah, it's a waste of time. I think there's lots of things in financial crime compliance that are a waste of time. We look at a whole load of rubbish, and we need to look at less rubbish and focus on the things that really matter. I guess there are tools coming down the pipe that are going to help us do that, I hope. But if you look at PEPs, it's just such a blunt instrument. And what we should really be doing is looking at actual financial crime risk. So, when people ask the regulator, as they are doing now, to get rid of rules or to focus them on something else, it's like, oh, but then the regulators don't want to ever get rid of any rules. But I think they could make a real difference to the job of a financial crime compliance person or an MLRO by focusing on that kind of risk efficiency. And they could get rid of layers of this nonsense. If you are assessing client risk, then you may or may not take into account the fact that someone is a politically exposed person. But there are certain politically exposed people. Someone who worked for Goldman Sachs who was in the House of Lords who just simply couldn't open a bank account. I mean, you just go, it's gone wrong. That bit's gone wrong. So I don't like to sympathise with Nigel Farage, but that kind of was.
Okay, great. So we're gonna move on to culture now, and actually I just wanted to, because we've been talking about this when we were preparing for today, and I thought some of your comments were really interesting about experiences you've had, and something which is kind of an intangible in terms of assessing culture. But I thought, so there was actually there was some quotes that I wanted to read, and I don't know if you had seen, there was a speech yesterday by Emily Shepherd, who's the COO of FCA, on culture. And I think some of the things she was saying, I was just thinking, well, this is Mark Taylor speaking through Emily Shepherd, the COO of FCA. It was kind of, so she said, like a winter bug making its rounds, culture can move quickly from person to person, meeting to meeting, decision to decision. A smile, a supportive comment, a listening ear, these things spread fast, creating an atmosphere where people feel valued, engaged, and empowered. But poor culture spreads just as quickly. A careless comment, raised voice, or silence in the face of wrongdoing can infect whole teams and threaten the health of an entire organization. Good or bad culture is contagious. She then goes on to sort of connect it to why FCA is so obsessed with culture. Time and again, when FCA investigates failures of consumer protection or market conduct, we find the same root cause: failings in culture and governance. That is no coincidence, because it is culture that drives conduct, culture that shapes decisions and actions at every level. Now, so turning to you, Mark, I think that when we were talking and you were talking about culture, you had some very interesting observations on when and where culture can be obsessed and subverted in a healthy way. And I wondered if you could expand on some of your experiences that you've had where you just think that this is the way to do it right, and this is where it went horribly wrong without getting sued.
Exactly. I think successful firms obviously have a culture of performance, and that can drive quite aggressive behaviour. And as with everything, there's a scale, and somewhere in the middle of that scale, that aggression is okay, and if it goes too far, it's not. I think I have to say, I've had a long career, and it's a lot to do with the people who managed me, and I was actually almost at every stage of my career I've had really good managers. And I know that many people won't have had that same experience, and that actually universally that they weren't the same. The people that managed me, but they had one thing in common: is that their actual door and their metaphorical door was always open. You could say anything. And they all wanted to talk. They wanted to talk about you, they wanted to talk about your life, they wanted to talk about your job. They had conversations regularly. I got to know them as friends as well as manager. They were hard asses, excuse the expression, so there was no kind of forgiveness if you got anything wrong. But actually there probably was. You did get second chances, and they listened and they cared about you. And I think if I look at some of the managers in the places that I've worked that didn't manage me, that didn't behave like that, I think that aggression, and everyone will know these people, but where that aggression is displayed and it causes accessibility problems. So if you're scared to go to someone because they're going to yell at you or criticize you or make you feel bad, these things are so basic I almost feel odd talking about it, but that's terrible, and these people can be and often are in very senior positions, and if I look at different firms, actually, a lot of the people in those senior positions did have a slightly aggressive side to them. I think where it didn't work, in my view, was where that aggression was just too much. And if you are, you should kind of be nervous about your own performance in a way. You want to be good, so you worry about going to present something to someone who you report to. I get that, but it shouldn't. You shouldn't be stopped from having that conversation. And where that really has an impact is if you think something is wrong, but you don't fully understand it, then I think you need to be able to air that, and someone needs to be forgiving about your lack of understanding. Obviously, you need to do a bit of work to support it, but I think the speed with which problems can be identified and reported is crucial. And if you create a bad reporting atmosphere, and lots of people do, then it's a problem.
And one other thing we discussed, which I thought was really interesting, if you look at something like the LIBOR scandal or FX, you were saying that you think there's sort of a window when you arrive into a firm within which you have the right to question things and go, well, wait a minute, that doesn't seem like that's good market practice. But after a certain time, you're just part of that group, and you're moving with them, and your opportunity to call out something that you don't think is culturally acceptable has gone. That's...
Yeah, there are lots of different moments and lots of different versions of that. I used to say nobody came to work saying they were going to fix LIBOR. I still think that's actually probably true.
Yeah.
The thing just flows, and particularly if you're a trainee and you arrive on the desk and someone says, "Yeah, ring up SocGen and ask them this, and if it's not that, then challenge it or accept it," or whatever they did, then it's really hard to imagine that someone on their first, second, third day, third week is actually going to be able to even know that's wrong.
Yeah.
I think that is really hard. I think employees and managers don't ask enough challenging questions, and we probably all know versions of, they've been looking at this report for the last 3 years and it's complete waste of time, it should have gone years ago, and someone should have said something and they don't, but it's hard. It's hard because of what I was talking about earlier. if you think someone's going to be aggressive, then challenging a practice is really difficult. It gets harder if it makes more money. If it's a very profitable bit of the business, people think, oh, that's great. I mean, one of my bosses at Goldman's particularly, who was an ex-trader, would always tell us to follow the money. So if something is too good to be true, it almost certainly is. I don't think that answers the LIBOR question, actually. I think you just run over a period of time into a bad practice. Yeah. It's very hard to challenge that. I think when you all step back at the end, you go, well, of course, we shouldn't have done that. But the journey to doing something wrong can be really slow, and therefore it's difficult to spot. I haven't particularly solved the problem there, but
no, it is a really hard one. So I'm just going to slightly connected to that.
I mean, actually, I can just talk about something just springs into my head. When we started listening to trader tapes from surveillance, and particularly if you've got some of the, I mean, when I was looking at it, it's probably more developed than it is now, but where there was kind of tonal changes that you could identify, you could actually see when a trader got stressed, and then if you listen to the tape, you can see get more and more stress as they miss the close or whatever it is, and that's really important. People around those events should hear that, yeah, and should say something.
Yeah. So related to that, and it was actually part of the same speech that Emily gave yesterday. So she says, one of the clearest warning signs of a failing culture is non-financial misconduct. Behaviors like bullying, harassment, and discrimination. And she says that the recent FCA survey on this found that across 1,000 wholesale firms, there were 2,347 allegations of non-financial misconduct in 2023. She said that's 9 per day, and those are just the incidents that were reported. So question for you, Mark, with the heightened focus of non-financial misconduct, especially from FCA, what do you think firms should be doing to spot and root out this sort of behaviour?
Well, there's a real challenge to all of this. Shall I read that out?
Yes, please do.
Yes, I've just been instructed. Well, probably the best way to detect non-financial misconduct is to install a reputable record-keeping platform that ensures data completeness and allows the compliance team to easily identify these risks in the communications of the institution. It's amazing. I'm not even being paid for this.
I'll hit you up later. But no, so give us your honest answer.
I've actually forgotten what the question is.
Non-financial misconduct. How do we identify that?
But so that's back to what I was talking about before. Right?
Yeah.
So that aggression, and being successful requires, a lot of positivity. It requires challenging people. But there's a way to do that, and it's often not done well. And when it's done really badly, it starts to be bullying. And actually, you've got to turn everything on its head. And in this current environment, with the Trump stuff and the DEI changes and all that, I really, really worry that there's going to be a lot of damage done to some of the better developments that we've got in culture and behaviour, and that need improving still, because at an extreme, that kind of bullying, pushing is terrible. And if you feel uncomfortable, and this is a bit now politically where people are going, oh, who cares? It's either right or it's wrong. But if someone feels uncomfortable in the workplace, that is a problem. It's a problem from them, and it's a problem for the team. And you need to kind of resolve that discomfort as a manager, I think. And you need to create an environment where as many people as possible are not uncomfortable. They feel comfortable challenging, they feel comfortable raising issues, discussing. And again, what I talked about earlier, the managers that I had, and I've been hugely lucky, allowed you to talk about pretty much anything. And in so doing, they created an environment where you felt comfortable talking, and therefore, I think this is wrong. You could say that. And that is so important. The trouble with the bullying, the sexual harassment, all of those things, is that there'll be 2 or 3 of those things that are false and wrong, false accusations, etc., or something that's a bit bonkers, kind of Daily Mail-ish. And but that should not deflect from the importance of creating an environment where that doesn't happen. You should feel comfortable coming to work. You should like to come to work, and you should feel comfortable airing a grievance. You should feel comfortable criticising, challenging, being criticised. And that's, I think I'm talking about all the cultural things that hopefully FCA want. But it is each manager. I mean, if you are a hard ass and you're in this room, be less of one. It's really important.
That leads quite nicely on to another tiny topic to address, which is whistleblowing, because I know you have quite strong views on what is the best environment for whistleblowing in terms of the way to deal with whistleblowers, and the different, if you look at the US approach to whistleblowing and the UK approach, it's markedly different. Give us your views, and have you got any scars yourself from whistleblowing experiences that you can talk to us about?
Well, I'll tell you about. So the American model's much better, because if you blow the whistle, you get a whole load of money and you're protected, which is good, I'm afraid. Here, if you blow the whistle, I can't remember the name of the HBOS guy, but someone will shout it out maybe. If you hear him talk, and he's really eloquent, really good person to listen to. His kind of whole career was ruined by, correctly blowing the whistle. And you can't really, that's just madness. If you have a problem and you go to a manager, you go to a regulator, you go to the head of the firm, you go to a non-executive director, and you raise the issue, and they go, do you want to be a whistleblower? Then that's not really that helpful, right? You've already said it. They should be saying, oh my God, this is so important that you are a whistleblower. And I think there's a real reticence on the part of the people that are receiving that negative information to go the whole hog and say, no, this is a really serious issue and you are going to be protected as a result of it. And obviously there are cases where people have tried to, we all know what they are, FCA have done well prosecuting those, where they've tried to unearth the whistleblower. But I think I'm sure I read somewhere that it's kind of that's happened again, or a version of it, and that all of that behaviour just says, well, I don't want to hear the bad news. Now, as we talked about sexual harassment and bullying, there will be a percentage of whistleblowing that's not factual or not right, or has some grievance attached to it being aired. But I think it's important that firms create a culture where those issues can be raised in a safe way. And it's all down to people performing better. I think if they feel as though if there's a problem they're going to be listened to, then the firm will behave better.
Okay, great. So I want to move on to senior managers regime, which has there were some consultations last year.
Now I'm going to raise my grievance to this question.
Okay. There were some consultations last year. They were talking about relaxing the senior managers regime, but what's your, with your experience, what do you think of the senior managers regime? Has it worked? Is it fit for purpose? And if you could change any of the senior managers regime, what would you change?
It's a bit of an odd setup, really, because it's a little bit ethereal in some sense, but there is this thing where I'm not sure I want to be a senior manager because there's this massive responsibility and blah, blah, blah. And so I think from a regulatory point of view, that's been a success, right? People really think about taking on those jobs. They probably do an analysis report when they take on the job. They report to the board. They worry about it. They look at what's gone before. All of that is good. As an MLRO, and pretty much also as a compliance officer, I think this is true, it's disproportionate. I mean, just on the pay, it's just bonkers, right? So, something goes wrong, and it's often in those spaces a cultural thing. And the senior manager regime would allow the regulator to ding the MLRO and the compliance officer. To be fair to them, they haven't done that on many occasions. But I always felt that having, particularly the MLRO, and I think obviously the actual responsibilities of the MLRO are very narrow under the senior manager regime, but you do kind of think, well, it applies to everything really, and I think it's disproportionate. If I was going to make a change to it, I might take the MLRO and the compliance officer out of the senior manager regime, but that's a radical suggestion.
Or get danger money for taking those roles.
Well, yeah. I mean,
because you have sleepless.
I mean, obviously, in a world where nurses are paid what they're paid and all that kind of thing, compliance officers and MROs get paid a lot. But in the rarefied atmosphere of financial services, it's disproportionate in terms of the risk of running, I think.
Okay. So, final question, Mark. And we sort of touched on it a little bit, which is we're in a position now where the government has started to encourage regulators, and it's not just the FCA, it could be the CMA, it could be Ofgem, whoever, to think about growth. So there is this sort of atmosphere at the moment. So they're saying, come to us with proposals where we can reduce regulatory burden to encourage growth. And this will, the commentary around this, whether it's from people from FCA or, people have said, well, this means there is going to be more risk as a result, and some people have been saying, oh, we're going to have Northern Rock all over again and the 2008 crash. But what's your view on this? Is there a balance? And if you were sort of cutting away regulation in order to encourage growth with obviously a a lens on risk, where do you think, yes, that is actually achievable?
Oh, I so want the Labour government to be better than they are. I don't know.
No politics.
The growth and risk thing. I mean, really? I mean, you know, it's just not. It's just bonkers, right? I mean, I thought the head of FCA got it exactly right. You know, can we all agree that we're going to be happy with, you know, bank defaults and deposits being lost? And, you know, no, we can't agree that. So it's going to be some awful almighty fudge. I love someone to take a red pen to all of the rules that don't work, that are a waste of time, that are, form over substance. My version of that was the pet bit that we talked about, but there are lots of other versions of that. You know, firms should be allowed to get on without having so many prescriptive rules in spaces where it doesn't matter so much. And I think just doing that would be positive. I don't know whether you'd be able to evidence that it helped with growth. I don't think any of the changes they're going to make are going to be evident. I don't think you're going to be able to prove it led to growth or not. Anyway, but if you just have this, the regulators responsible for making sure that the rules don't block growth, well, you just got this massive risk hole that it is dangerous. I think it's a really dangerous conversation, I think.
Okay, great. Right, Mark, you are through, and thank you very, very much. I found it fascinating. Time went very quickly. Thank you, and your new consulting firm is you're available. If anyone would like to use
the last 10 minutes for a pitch,
Mark's experience, but no, we're going to go to a break now. Thank you very much. I would love it if you would give Mark a big round of applause, please.